Hello everyone and welcome to Quality Old Games. Today it's time for another tier list. This time we are rating all missile units in the game, and we will also consider differences between different factions, even if they have exactly the same missile unit, but for some factions the missile unit might be more important than for another one. And the setting is campaign setting, so in addition to units' fighting capabilities, also the requirements and costs are taken into consideration. And as you can already see, I have omitted siege weapons from this tier list because, well, they look pretty much the same, and the coloring might be even, or color differences might be difficult to see. So I will say a few words about artillery at the end of this video, but the focus is on these kind of basic missile units. But without further ado, let's begin with first ones. We have Archer Warband, and we have actually first Dacian variant. And I think I will give them wannabe Spartan tier. And the reasoning is that Dacian unit roster, in my opinion, is rather horrible. So, at least for tiers 1 and 2. So basically, for tier 2, this is the best unit you pretty much have available. In tier 3 there is availability of Chosen Swordsman and Chosen Archer Warband, which kind of don't make this quite Spartan tier, but at least in my Dacia campaign I was relying on these guys really much. Practically the whole early game and quite far in the mid game, and I did use them in late game as well. So really important for Dacia in my opinion. Then we have Scythian variant, and I'll give them bad tier. Yeah, I get if you are defending settlements, then archers are rather nice, but I think you shouldn't be defending settlements when playing with Scythia. You should be trying to intercept enemy armies before they can besiege you, and you should be trying to fight in the open field whenever possible. So Scythian variant of Archer Warband is bad in my opinion because they do have horse archers, really good horse archers, easily available horse archers, and if you didn't guess already, you should be making horse archers instead of these guys, because horse archers are OP in this game. Then let's move to Chosen Archer Warband. I think for Dacia they are Spartan tier, practically the best unit they have access to. And if you combine them with Chosen Swordsman, you can have rather solid army to face even late game enemy armies. Of course, other factions can field better infantry, but these are among the tippity top of missile units overall. So Spartan tier for them. And I think the same applies to Germania, perhaps to a bit weaker degree, because Germania has access to Gothic cavalry, so they don't rely quite that much on archery units, and at the same time Germania's infantry roster is more diverse. At the same time, that said, infantry roster, especially the higher tier units, tend to be rather vulnerable to missiles. So the importance of this Chosen Archer Warband is increased because they need to deal with enemy missile units before they can wipe out Germanian, say, Chosen Axemen or Berserkers or something like that. So these guys do have kind of a dual role. They need to protect the infantry that's vulnerable to missiles, whereas they also need to kind of support the infantry. Then we have Scythian variant. I mean, once again, you shouldn't be making these, but as the unit is so good that I just cannot give it bad. I mean, it's decent. And of course in cavalry battles, if you are facing, say, Parthian horse archers, then perhaps Chosen Archers or even Archer Warbands are the better way to counter them than your own horse archers. You will need superior numbers in that case. But yeah, not quite as important for Scythia as for Dacia and Germania, mainly because of the horse archers. Then we have Forester Warband. And well, I think I will give them only wannabe Spartan tier. And the reasoning is that while they do have spears, which is rather nice, because cavalry usually tries to go after archers, so they can actually hold their own against light cavalry, at least against equites. Perhaps Roman cavalry will actually deal with them, but still, rather nice to have spears for that situation. But they lack armor. So even if they have long-range missiles, but they end up in a skirmish against chosen archers, I think chosen archer armor will actually prove superior to forester warbands, because, well, they don't take so much damage from missiles, whereas these foresters will take more damage. So that's a kind of a minus in my books. And of course, if they end up in melee against infantry, these guys will perform better, but I'm not sure. Weak Spartan, strong wannabe Spartan. I think I will give them strong wannabe Spartan, at least for now. Feel free to disagree if you feel so. Then we have head hurlers. I mean, kind of niche unit. But I think for late game, this unit is rather essential for Britain. It's especially useful against heavily armored late game units such as urban cohort, heavily armored hoplites such as armored hoplites, etc., etc. The downside of this unit is really short range, actually only a slight longer than, say, Hastati, but armor piercing, really high missile attack. When these guys get to hurl those heads, they stand at least head and shoulders taller than any other enemies. Feel free to continue those head jokes in the comments below. There were actually quite good ones when these were tested last time. Then we have slingers, the Briton variant. I have to admit that I don't like too much slingers. I prefer archers because of those arching shots, so you can put the missile units behind your infantry line. Whereas if you're using slingers, you need to have them on the flanks or in the front, and if they are on skirmish mode and run behind your infantry and continue shooting, they might actually fire your own troops in the back. And if they are on the flanks, then you need to be kind of keep a careful eye on them so that enemy cavalry cannot surprise them. You need to have some infantry to move to protect them in such situations, so on and so forth. So, in my opinion, archers are so much simpler to use, and so that's I prefer them. Then again, this is the kind of the best long range, or rather the only long range unit for Briton roster. So yeah, I think it's decent because that's pretty much the only counter you can have, for example, against enemy archers or something like that. So Britain just needs them because head hurlers are not great against enemy missile units, so you need to use slingers. And I think the same pretty much applies to Spanish slingers. Once again, the roster requires them to have these if you want to have missile units, because the only other option is skirmishers, and well, I'll get to skirmishers next. So, Spanish peltasts or other skirmishers. I think they are peltasts, they look like peltasts. Yeah, I think they are bad. Without regard to the faction, I think peltasts are just bad. If you have javelin cavalry, they can be rather nice because you can rather easily circle the enemy and throw those javelins on their backs. But when you have infantry, that circling option is rather limited, and if these guys end up in melee, they will be beaten really quickly. So I think all of these units are rather bad, perhaps not quite Eastern infantry level. Well, perhaps Germanians actually are, because they have that spear warband, and I don't think that spear warband actually needs any skirmishers for support. And these are actually higher tier units, so yeah, that's Eastern infantry. For Spain, they need to do with Iberian infantry at this level, so perhaps they are a bit useful for Gaul. They could have access to swordsmen. Yeah, I think that will go to Eastern infantry category as well. I mean, take rather one additional unit of swordsmen and you don't need even to build the missile ranges quite just yet. Then we have our first, well, not the first archer unit, but next archer unit from Numidia, Numidian archers. They are the best missile unit Numidia has access to. They also have access to slingers, but here my preference is shown archers over slingers. I think Numidian slingers can be rather decent, but on the lower end of this, and archers are wannabe Spartan tier, even though they have higher requirements than the slingers. But the ease of use in battles is what puts them in wannabe Spartan tier in my books. So unless you have really nice micro, you like to pause the game very often, I think archers will just... they are so much easier to use than slingers. Then we have Carthaginian slingers. Yeah, they are the best missile unit Carthage has access if you discount war elephants and armored war elephants. Slingers are not that good on walls. I was kind of thinking giving them decent here because, well, they are the best missile unit Carthage has access, but I don't think you should actually train these. Actually, I don't think you should build any practice ranges as Carthage, because you should focus on cavalry and infantry when you get access to pony infantry. Before that, get mercenaries. So yeah, I will give them bad tier. They are useful in some situations, but I think the mercenaries available for Carthage, especially Balearic slingers, will be quite a bit better than these guys. Even, well, perhaps not Libyan mercenaries, but yeah, I think it's relatively bad unit. Then we have Numidian javelin men. And, well, as I was saying about skirmishers, I don't like them, but these guys do have the speciality that you can recruit them from tier 1 barracks. So that's practically tier 1 settlement. And Numidia doesn't have any tier 1 infantry, so they just have to use these guys. And, well, as it's the only available option, I think it's relatively decent. I mean, these guys will go head-to-head against, say, Town Watch, Eastern Infantry, Warband, or something like that. So I think they should be able to do that rather decently. So that's the reasoning for giving them decent tier, but I'm not going to put them above slingers. Oh, but they do have archers, yeah. Actually, I'm going to put them above slingers, yeah. Then we have Carthaginian skirmishers. Yeah, they are just bad. And as I was actually saying, you shouldn't go for the building chain at all. I think these guys actually deserve a place in Eastern Infantry tier. Okay, so we have two Parthian slinger icons over there, so let's just ignore the latter one. But yeah, now we have archers. First we have Armenian archers. I think they do suffer pretty much from the same thing as Scythian archer warband. So per se, it's relatively nice unit, but as you have access to horse archers, you shouldn't pretty much get them. Same applies to Parthian archers, but since Pontus roster is quite a bit different, I think these guys are decent enough for Pontus roster, as they are their best missile units. And they don't have access to horse archers, so you will need some support units, especially as you are facing horse archers factions, so you will need some missile units to counter them. Then we have Eastern Peltasts, first Armenian. As I was saying, you shouldn't get those archers too much. The same applies to these guys, they are rather obsolete. Pontus Peltasts, yeah, I think you should get those Kythet chariots rather than these guys. You get blacksmith as a kind of a bonus building, so yeah, just ignore these until you can, or just ignore the practice ranges until you can get archers. And then we have these Parthian slingers, and I think the same applies to them as to those other units. Just try to get those horse archers instead. So yeah, to Eastern Infantry tier. Then we have Egyptian bowmen. I mean, yeah, decent enough, I think. Especially as you will be facing Parthia most likely, so you need counters to those horse archers, and well, they complement rather nicely, for example, Nile spearmen or something like that. So yeah, definitely decent. And then we have Pharaoh's guards, one of the best archer units in the entire game, one of the best Egyptian units in the entire game, so clearly a Spartan tier for them. I think most of Egyptian armies should have pharaoh's guards, even though they cost quite a bit, and are rather slow to train, but still I think clearly Spartan tier. Then we have Greek archers, and I think I will give these wannabe Spartan tier. And the reasoning is that the Greek roster is really limited, excepting infantry. So you will need some missile support unit most likely, and perhaps in some situations militia cavalry just don't cut it. So in my opinion, Greek archers are the best missile units available for Greeks, and thus there could be perhaps several of these in an army. Of course, you should try to get Grecian archers instead if you have them available, but since you cannot train them, then perhaps this is your best choice. Then we have Macedonian variant. I will give them decent tier because they are not quite as critical for Macedonian roster as the Greek variant is for Greek roster, as Macedon does have access to rather large selection of cavalry, so the archers are not quite as viable for them as they are for Greeks. Then we have Seleukid archers. I think the same applies to Seleukids as well as to Macedon, perhaps even to larger extent, because Seleukids have available Scythed chariots, they have a rather nice roster of pikes, cavalry, elephants, etc, etc. So once again, the whole archery building chain kind of feels obsolete for them, but there are some situations where these guys can be worthy, especially if you are facing enemy horse archers, then these might be one of your best counters for them. Then we have Thracian variant, and I think they belong to A tier as well, and perhaps even higher than the Greek variant. And the reasoning is, once again, the Thracian roster is rather limited, and even its infantry roster is more limited than the Greeks' infantry roster. So you need to be creative what units you apply and how you apply them. And in that puzzle, I think Thracia must utilize their archers to get most out of their armies. Then we have heavy peltasts. Yeah, I was kind of thinking of giving them decent tier. I mean, the unit is rather, it feels like light infantry that can throw quite a few of javelins. So that's really nice feel. Then again, it's rather high tier unit, and that's an issue in my books. So perhaps on the lower end of decent tier or bad tier. Because, well, if I think, should I take one of these guys or should I take one of those Greek archers? I think I would take almost always Greek archers. So then giving these guys decent feels a bit too much. So I think they will go to bad tier. The unit per se is rather nice. As I said, it kind of functions as light infantry as well. But in missile exchanges, I would prefer archers over these guys. Mostly because they have more missiles, they have more range, and if you get to the back of the enemy, it kind of doesn't matter are you throwing javelins or firing arrows. Then we have peltasts, 4 variants. Macedonian variant first. I think it will go to Eastern Infantry tier. Macedon doesn't need this. Make light lancers instead to complement your phalanxes. Greek cities, well, they don't have access to light lancers or something like that. Perhaps there might be some use, but still it's rather bad unit. So make perhaps another unit of hoplites instead of these guys. I mean, even if you have already 18 hoplite units in your army and you are considering whether to make, in addition to general, one additional hoplite unit or one skirmisher unit, I still say you should make that one hoplite unit more, because it's more useful in the battles, at least in my opinion. Then we have Seleukid peltasts, once again, just trash, you shouldn't make them, because, well, Seleukids have available much better units than these. And especially in the early game, you should focus on the infantry buildings and blacksmiths, most likely. And when you get more money, then upgrade those infantry buildings and then cavalry stables. So the unit kind of feels obsolete, so just don't make. And Thracian variant, I think, once again, bad, but not quite horrible. So, once again, as the Thracian roster is rather limited, then you might end up using these, but... well, actually, I'm not certain. Perhaps these guys could complement militia hoplites and falksmen in some situations, but still perhaps rather militia cavalry over these guys. So, yeah, perhaps they might have some use, but I'm not sure. So, it feels kind of a bad unit. Then we have mercenaries. First we have Balearic Slingers, most definitely to wannabe Spartans. I mean, usually in campaign they come with 2 experience points, so that already is quite something. And they are tied with Rhodian Slingers, the best slinger unit in the entire game, and they can go head to head almost with any other archer units in the game, and they can inflict damage rather nicely, and they are perhaps the best missile unit available to some factions, say Carthage. So really, really solid addition to some unit rosters. And for example, if you're playing with Romans, you will benefit from these units quite a bit if you recruit them. Because, well, Roman archers are rather difficult to get, at least in the early game, in my experience. And, well, these guys are better than Roman archers, so you should hire them. Then we have Grecian archers. It's argued that the best archer unit in the entire game. Perhaps there are some other arguments for some other long-range archery units, but clearly Spartan tier available from tier 1 for Greek cities. I think you should hire these whenever you can for 2 reasons. They are really solid unit, and then the enemy cannot get them. So yeah, you should try to hoard them. Because long range, rather nice missile damage. Of course, if they end up on the receiving end, they will take damage casualties quite quickly, but nonetheless a really, really solid unit. And of course available for everyone. So for example, for Greek cities, the only archer unit available with long range. So that even increases the utility even in late game. So considering about training 1 additional unit of armored hoplites for Greek cities, or hiring one of these, I think you should hire one of these in most of the cases. They bring so much value. Then we have Illyrian mercenaries. I think these are actually the best Peltast unit in the game, and as with heavy Peltast, they kind of act as light infantry when they run out of missiles. In Illyria, they are available in quite nice numbers and can quite often keep an offensive going quite nicely, so I will give them rather solid, decent tier. Well, let's put them somewhere around here. And yeah, you should get them. They are rather nice. Of course, don't expect too much of them, and eventually, when you get access to late game missile units for most of the factions, Romans, Barbarians, Egyptians, then those late game missile units are better than these. But, I mean, solid unit, especially in the early game. Then we have Libyan mercenaries. I mean, relatively bad, but in Northern Africa, available in quite large numbers. And once again, they can keep the offensive going when you are suffering casualties in battles. And of course, they can keep up public order rather nicely, so yeah, kind of situational unit. If you need to keep going, then just hire these, and they will do at least, say, part of the job. But just don't rely too much on them. They are still kind of basic Peltast unit, and that means they are not really good. And perhaps I should put them a bit lower here. Then we have mercenary Peltasts, kind of wannabe Illyrian mercenaries. Illyrian mercenaries have a bit better stats than these, but I mean, decent enough unit, but not the best among decent units. So available for some factions, they might be useful in some situations, but really not that good in my opinion, but not that bad either. So yeah, kind of weak decent. Then we have Rodian Slingers. Pretty much same applies to these as to Balearic Slingers, one of the best missile units in the game, but because both of these units lack the long range, I think I will actually put the long range unit before them, but still really solid unit, both of these. Then we have Archer Auxilia, so we come to Romans. Archer Auxilia is not in one-on-one, I don't think it can beat any of these units over here. But what makes them great, in my opinion, is that they are relatively cheap. They take only one turn to train, so you can have a rather high number of them relatively easily. So, and they do have long range. And in my books, long range is always really important, because then you can kind of force the enemy into battle in your terms if the enemy has only, say, normal archer units. Then if the enemy doesn't engage, then you can just shoot them all that you like and choose when to engage. So I think it's really important. So yeah, perhaps not on the highest end of Spartan tier, but still Spartan tier because of the, say, cost efficiency of the unit. Then we have Light Auxilia, I mean post-Marian Javelin unit. Yeah, it's just trash. At this stage of the game, you usually have enough production facilities to make Archer Auxilia. So if you train these guys, you should do that only in some settlements where you cannot train anything else. I would probably take even normal Auxilia over these guys. For example, if I see enemy army coming in and I have to scramble everything I can to protect the settlement. Still, yeah. Perhaps in some cases you could recruit these, but just go for the Archer Auxilia. Then we have Roman Archers. I mean, the unit is decent enough in the early game, but in my experience it's rather difficult to get, because it takes tier 3 building, the settlement tier 3, so I don't remember the building name, but it takes 4 turns to build and costs about 3,000. So yeah, quite often when I could begin to train these, the same applies as to Triarii. The Marian reforms are already coming and, well, I don't get these guys. So decent enough in battle, but at least I see them quite rarely. So kind of feels a bit obsolete unit. But you usually have one of these at the start of the campaign, so that's really nice. It's really useful, especially when you are sieging those settlements with wooden palisades or wooden walls. You get hundreds of casualties inflicted with this unit. So yeah, decent enough, but quite rare. Then we have Velites, another Peltast unit. I mean, it's better in battle than most of the other Peltast units, but still, I don't think it's rather useful. So train additional unit of Hastati or Equites instead of these guys, because, well, they kind of feel squishy, and the number of missiles is rather limited. And I know if you are facing elephants, then javelins are really nice, but in most of those battles, I would still take, for example, Archer Auxilia or Roman Archers. But yeah, perhaps in some situations these guys could be rather useful. So, then that few words about artillery units. So basically, there are several categories of artillery based on faction. So we have Roman factions, Barbarian factions, Eastern factions, Greek factions, and Carthaginian factions or Northern African factions. And basically the artillery crews depend on the faction. So Roman crew is the best, and actually, if I remember correctly, in one of the videos, Roman artillery crew actually beat Eastern infantry in melee. And I think that's quite impressive, to be honest. A bit weaker variant of the crew is Barbarian crews, and those are rather equal to Eastern crews, so Parthian, Pontus, etc., etc. And the weakest artillery crews are with Greek factions and those Carthaginian Northern African factions. And a funny detail is that actually the Roman artillery crew has armor value of 7, which is equal to armor value of 3. So basically Roman artillery is crewed by heavy infantry, which is kind of nuts. Then we have those different artillery types, onagers, ballistas, etc., etc. I think that in battles, onagers, heavy onagers are the most useful, but since they require quite often that highest tier artillery or archery building, they are not that viable to get. So I think onager is the best one. And actually I used scorpions in some previous battles, and well, they didn't feel quite horrible, so perhaps they are my second favorite artillery unit. Then heavy onagers, ballistas, repeating ballistas in that order. Why I don't like artillery units is that they slow down campaign map movement speed, and in battles they quite rarely inflict significant amount of casualties. That might be because of the playstyle as well. And of course, if you are playing some factions that have difficulty scaling walls, then perhaps artillery can be useful, but quite often that viewpoint is presented when you are having horse archer faction, say Scythia. So you should bring artillery to knock down walls so you can get your horse archers inside the settlement. Yeah, that's pretty much the only way to get them in, but at the same time, those artillery pieces will especially slow down the horse archer armies, and at the same time, I'm not certain you want to get those horse archers inside walls, because they will just thwip around, go into melee, or one of them will go into melee, and then the rest of the unit will follow. Controlling the units in cities is just nightmare, so perhaps you should try to keep those horse archers out of the cities in any case. But that's my view. So this is my view of the missile units in Rome Total War. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. If you like the content, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member, and very special thanks to existing channel members Napoleon Complex, Kosakusar, Mark Anthony. Your support is greatly treasured. Have a great rest of the day. Quality Old Games out.